Since the dawn of human consciousness, we have gathered in the dark to tell stories. Around the flickering, primal light of a fire, in the hushed, conspiratorial quiet of a bedroom after midnight, we have collectively and instinctively whispered tales of the things that lurk just beyond the edges of our perception, just outside the circle of light and safety. We have told stories of monsters in the deep woods, of ghosts in the attic, of the creature with sharp claws and glowing eyes that waits patiently under the bed. These stories, these urban legends, folktales, and myths, have always served a crucial dual purpose in human society. They are, on the one hand, a form of entertainment, a thrilling and cathartic way to touch the void, to experience fear in a controlled environment, without actually falling in. But they are also, and perhaps more importantly, a form of social control, a collection of cautionary tales that teach us the fundamental rules of a dangerous and unpredictable world. Don't wander off the established path. Don't talk to strangers. Don't open the one door you were expressly forbidden to open. For most of human history, there has been a safe, solid, and universally understood wall between the story and the storyteller, between the fiction and the reality. The monster was understood on a fundamental level to be just theta story, a symbol, a powerful metaphorical representation of a real-world fear, be it the fear of the wilderness, the fear of outsiders, or the fear of our own inner darkness. We knew, with a certainty that was rarely questioned, that the monster under the bed was not, in a literal sense, real. But what happens to that certainty when the very nature of storytelling undergoes a radical tectonic shift? What happens when the flickering, communal campfire is replaced by the infinite, immersive, and often isolating glow of a personal computer screen? What happens when the stories are no longer whispered by a single known person, but are created, shared, and mutated by millions of anonymous, disembodied voices at once, blurring the line between author and audience, between creator and believer, between the game and the world outside the game? This is the strange, chaotic, and revolutionary world of creepypasta. The word itself is a portmanteau, a linguistic mashup born of internet culture, a combination of the word creepy and the term copypasta, which is internet slang for a block of text that is copied and pasted again and again across online forums and social media. Creepypastas are, in essence, the urban legends of the digital age. They are horror stories born on and for the internet, often told in the first person to create a sense of immediacy and authenticity. They are frequently presented not as fiction, but as true, found documents of forgotten diary entry discovered on an old hard drive, a description of a lost and supposedly cursed video game, a transcript of a haunted television broadcast. They are a new kind of folklore, one that is collaborative, constantly evolving, deeply immersive, and uniquely suited to the architecture of the internet itself. For the most part, this new form of digital storytelling is a harmless, wildly creative, and genuinely thrilling evolution of a timeless human tradition. It has produced some of the most innovative and memorable horror concepts of the 21st century. But this is a story about the times when it was not harmless. This is a story about the rare, but terrifying moments when the invisible membrane between the digital fiction and the physical world became stretched, stressed, terrifyingly thin, and then ruptured completely, with violent and tragic consequences. This is about what happens when the monsters we create online for our own amusement climb out of the screen and into our backyards, into our schools, into our homes. Today, we will journey into the dark and complex heart of this phenomenon. We will explore the creation, the evolution, and the terrifying real-world legacy of the internet's most infamous boogeyman, a tall, faceless, and silent figure who drove two young girls to commit an act of almost unimaginable violence against their best friend, the Slender Man. And we will look at other, related instances where online horror challenges, rituals, and narratives have spilled over into reality, with tragic and often deadly results. This is a story not about fictional monsters, but about the very real, very complex, and very dangerous power of a story that is believed. It is a deep, and often uncomfortable, investigation into the moment when creepypasta becomes true crime. Our story begins not in a dark and stormy night, not in a haunted forest or an ancient, decrepit house, but in a place far more mundane, and in a way, far more modern. A creative contest on an internet forum. The date is June 8, 2009. The place is the Something Awful Forums, a humor and culture website that was, at the time, a major hub for a certain brand of ironic, creative, and internet-savvy user. A user starts a thread in the Paranormal Pictures subforum. The challenge is simple, a playful exercise in digital deception. Use a photo editing program like Photoshop to create a convincing, spooky, paranormal photograph and try to pass it off as genuine. It was a creative game, a way for a community of digital artists to showcase their skills and have a little fun scaring each other. 2 days later, on June 10th, a user with the online handle Victor Surge, whose real name is Eric Knudsen, posted 2 black and white photographs to the thread. The photos were masterfully done. They were grainy and atmospheric, appearing to be authentic, historical photographs depicting groups of happy, carefree children playing outdoors. But lurking in the background of each photo, almost hidden among the trees or just at the edge of the frame, was a new, deeply unsettling, and utterly original figure. He was unnaturally tall and disturbingly thin, wearing a dark, featureless, and formal suit. His limbs were elongated and spidery, disproportionate to his body. And most terrifyingly of all, he had no face, no eyes, no nose, no mouth, just a blank, white, ovoid head, as smooth and as featureless as an egg. To ground his creation in a sense of found history and verisimilitude, Knudsen added snippets of cryptic, fictional text beneath the photos, attributing them to library archives and witness testimonies. The first caption read, "We didn't want to go, we didn't want to kill them," but its persistent silence and outstretched arms horrified and comforted us at the same time. 1983. Photographer unknown, presumed dead. Under the second, more famous photo of children on a playground, he added, "One of 2 recovered photographs from the Sterling City Library blaze, notable for being taken the day which 14 children vanished and for what is referred to as the Slender Man. Deformities cited as film defects by officials. Fire at library occurred 1 week later. Actual photograph confiscated as evidence." In these 2 simple forum posts, with just 2 expertly doctored images and a few short, evocative lines of text, the Slender Man was born. Knudsen's creation was a work of subtle, suggestive, and minimalist genius. He didn't explain what the Slender Man was or what he wanted. He just presented him as a silent, ominous, predatory presence, a figure whose motives were as blank as his face. The lack of a face made him a perfect psychological blank slate, a vessel onto which anyone could project their own deepest, most personal fears. The lack of a clear motive made him unpredictable and all the more terrifying. He was a perfect, open-source monster. The Slender Man was an immediate and explosive hit on the Something Awful forums. Other users were instantly captivated by the concept. They began to build upon Knudsen's creation, contributing to this new, shared mythology. They added their own photoshopped images of the Slender Man, placing him in the background of their own family photos or other historical images. They wrote their own fictional witness accounts, their own police reports, their own diary entries from his supposed victims. This was the birth of a new kind of folklore. Unlike traditional legends, which are passed down and mutated slowly over generations, the Slender Man was being created, defined, and evolved in real time by a collaborative, anonymous, and highly creative digital community. The mythos quickly grew more complex and detailed. The community established a set of rules for their creation. The Slender Man was said to have long, black, prehensile tentacles or extra appendages that could sprout from his back. He could cause a specific set of symptoms in his victims, including memory loss, intense paranoia, coughing fits, and a general malaise that became known as Slender sickness. He could teleport, moving silently and instantly from one location to another. He often lurked in forests or near playgrounds, places where children could be found. And most importantly, a key and ultimately tragic part of the lore emerged: the idea of the proxy. The Slender Man, the sprawling, collaborative story went, rarely acted alone. He would choose, brainwash, or psychologically manipulate individuals, often vulnerable children or teenagers, into doing his bidding. These proxies would serve him, luring other victims to him, creating chaos, or committing acts of violence on his behalf. To become a proxy for the Slender Man was a terrible fate, but it was also, in a twisted way, a form of salvation. It was a way to be spared from his direct wrath by becoming an instrument of it. The Slender Man soon escaped the relatively niche confines of the Something Awful forums and spread like a digital virus across the entire internet. He became the subject of countless stories on the Creepypasta Wiki, a massive online repository for internet horror fiction that acted as a central hub for the genre. He became the star of a hugely popular and genuinely terrifying found-footage YouTube series called Marble Hornets, which built an elaborate, multi-year, interactive narrative around the creature and his psychological effects on a group of young filmmakers. He was the silent, terrifying antagonist in several successful independent video games, most notably Slender, The 8 Pages, and its sequel, Slender, The Arrival, which brought the character to a massive new audience of gamers. Within just a few short years, the Slender Man had become the undisputed king of internet horror. He was this generation's Freddy Krueger, this generation's Pennywise. He was the new bogeyman. But for the vast, overwhelming majority of people who encountered him, who read the stories, watched the videos, and played the games, he was understood to be exactly what he was: a brilliant, fascinating, and completely fictional character. A stunningly successful, crowdsourced work of horror art. They enjoyed the thrill, they shared the memes, they appreciated the creativity, and they understood the safe, solid, and inviolable wall between the fiction they were consuming and the reality in which they lived. But for 2 young girls in the quiet, quintessential suburban town of Waukesha, Wisconsin, that wall did not exist. For them, the lines had not just blurred, they had been completely erased. For them, the Slender Man was not a story. He was not a meme. He was not a game. He was real, and he was talking to them. Their names were Morgan Geyser and Anissa Weier. In the spring of 2014, they were both 12 years old. They were, by most accounts from their teachers and peers, quiet, socially awkward, and lonely children. They were best friends, their bond forged in the crucible of middle school isolation, a shared feeling of being outsiders who didn't quite fit in. And they had found a place online where they felt they belonged, a world that made sense to them. The vast, dark, and intricate world of creepypasta. They spent countless hours online, devouring every story they could find about the Slender Man, watching and rewatching the Marble Hornets series, immersing themselves completely in his dark, sprawling, and ever-growing mythology. But for Morgan and Anissa, their intense interest went far beyond simple fandom or a creative hobby. They began to believe, with a chilling and absolute conviction, that the Slender Man was a real, physical entity. They believed he was watching them. They believed he could read their minds. They believed he lived in a mansion in the Nicolet National Forest in northern Wisconsin. And, most critically, they came to believe that he could, and would, harm their families if they did not prove their loyalty to him. The fictional lore of the proxy, which was just a narrative device for the storytellers, became, for them, a real-world, life-or-death imperative. They came to believe that the only way to prove their worth to the Slender Man, the only way to become his proxies and thus protect their families from his terrible, silent wrath, was to commit a murder in his name. They needed to make a human sacrifice, and they chose their victim. It was their other best friend, a 12-year-old girl named Peyton Lutner, who they affectionately called Bella. The three girls were, by all outward appearances, a close-knit and happy trio. They had frequent sleepovers, they played together at the park, they shared secrets. Peyton was not a believer in the Slender Man. She found the stories strange and unsettling and had tried to tell her friends that he wasn't real. She was just a normal 12-year-old girl who loved her friends and had no idea of the dark, delusional world they were secretly inhabiting. The plan that Morgan and Anissa concocted was detailed, premeditated, and deeply, profoundly disturbing. They had been planning it for months, discussing it in hushed tones at school and online. They decided to carry out the attack on the weekend of Morgan's 12th birthday sleepover, on May 30th, 2014. Their initial plan was to murder Peyton in her sleep that night, stabbing her while she was vulnerable. But, according to their later statements, they couldn't bring themselves to do it. Anissa said she felt too tired. Morgan said she felt a pang of guilt. So they moved to their backup plan. The next morning, on Saturday, May 31st, after a seemingly normal night of birthday celebrations, the three girls went to a nearby park to play. Morgan and Anissa suggested a game of hide-and-seek, using it as a pretext to lure Peyton into a secluded, wooded area of the park. As they walked deeper into the woods, Anissa encouraged Peyton to lie down on the ground and cover herself with leaves and twigs, telling her it would be a great hiding spot. As Peyton lay on the ground, trusting and unsuspecting, Morgan Geyser, holding a 5-inch kitchen knife she had taken from her home and hidden in her bag, knelt over her friend. According to their later confessions to police, in that final, terrible moment, Anissa turned to Morgan and whispered the words that would trigger the violence, a phrase that sounded like something from one of their stories. "Go ballistic, go crazy." And Morgan did. She pounced on Peyton, pinning her down, and began to stab her, again and again. She stabbed Peyton Lutner 19 times. The small kitchen knife pierced her arms, her legs, her torso. Several of the wounds were incredibly severe, striking major organs, including her liver, her stomach, and her pancreas. One stab wound missed a major artery near her heart by less than a millimeter. It was an act of shocking, brutal violence. Believing that Peyton was either dead or would be soon, Morgan and Anissa simply walked away. They left their best friend to bleed to death alone in the woods. Their plan now, as they saw it, was to begin their new life. They would walk to the Nicolet National Forest, a vast wilderness hundreds of miles to the north, where they believed the Slender Man lived in his mansion and would be waiting to welcome them, his loyal and proven new proxies. But Peyton Lutner did not die. In an act of almost superhuman will, courage, and pure survival instinct, she did not give up. After her attackers left, she managed to pull herself to her feet. Bleeding profusely in unimaginable pain, she began to crawl and stumble out of the woods and towards a nearby paved path. She was discovered there by a cyclist who was riding through the park. He saw the small girl, covered in blood, and immediately called 911. Paramedics arrived on the scene to find a 12-year-old girl on the brink of death, who managed to whisper to them, "I was stabbed, I've been stabbed all over." She was rushed to the hospital, where she underwent 6 hours of intensive emergency surgery. Miraculously, against all odds, she survived. Meanwhile, Morgan and Anissa were found by police several hours later, walking along an interstate highway, miles from the park, still on their delusional pilgrimage to find the Slender Man. The blood-stained knife was in Morgan's bag. When they were taken into custody and brought to the Waukesha police station for interrogation, they did not deny what they had done. They calmly and matter-of-factly told the stunned detectives the whole story. They explained, with a chilling lack of emotion, that they had to do it. They did it for the Slender Man. The recorded police interrogations are deeply disturbing to watch. The two 12-year-old girls, sitting in a sterile gray interview room, explain the intricate details of a fictional monster's mythology to a bewildered, middle-aged detective who is clearly struggling to comprehend what he is hearing. Anissa Wire patiently explains the rules of the Slender Man's world. He can be anywhere from 6 to 14 feet tall. He has no face. He can teleport and read your mind. He has proxies, which are people who do his bidding, and I was scared of what would happen if I didn't do this. Morgan Geyser, in her own interview, tells her interrogator that Slender Man has been visiting her for years, that she can see him when others can't, that he watches her from the trees. When the detective asks her if she feels any guilt or regret for what she did to her friend, she says with a shrug, "It was necessary." The case became an immediate international media sensation. It was the moment the wall between fiction and reality had not just crumbled, but had been violently and bloodily shattered. A monster created as a joke on an internet forum had inspired a real-world attempted murder, carried out by two children against their best friend. The story was a nightmare for parents everywhere and raised a host of terrifying and complex questions that society is still grappling with. How could this happen? Were these two girls simply evil? Were they profoundly mentally ill? Was the internet itself to blame? Was the creepypasta community, the creators and purveyors of these dark tales, somehow culpable for this real-world violence? The legal proceedings that followed were long, complex, and emotionally fraught. The defense attorneys argued passionately that the girls should not be tried as adults in the criminal justice system, where they faced decades in prison. They presented a mountain of evidence that both girls suffered from significant, undiagnosed mental health issues. Morgan Geyser was diagnosed by multiple psychiatrists with early-onset childhood schizophrenia, a severe and debilitating mental illness that causes profound hallucinations, paranoia, and delusional thinking. The defense argued that Morgan genuinely believed the Slender Man was real because, in her mind, she was seeing him, hearing him, interacting with him. Anissa Wire was diagnosed with a shared delusional disorder, also known as folie à deux, a rare psychiatric syndrome in which a symptom of psychosis, like a delusional belief, is transmitted from one individual to another. The defense argued that Anissa, lonely and highly suggestible, had been drawn into and had come to share the schizophrenic delusions of her charismatic best friend, Morgan. Their central argument was that the girls were not criminally responsible for their actions because they could not, due to their severe mental illnesses, appreciate the wrongfulness of their conduct or distinguish between the demands of their delusion and the rules of reality. The prosecution, while acknowledging the presence of mental illness, argued that the girls knew what they were doing was wrong on a fundamental level. They had planned the attack for months. They had discussed it in detail. They had lied to their victim to lure her into the woods. They had whispered to each other just before the attack, showing a level of conspiracy. They understood the finality of death. Therefore, they should be held criminally responsible. Ultimately, after long and contentious legal battles, both girls reached plea agreements and were found not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect. They were not sent to prison, but were committed to state mental health institutions, where they would receive intensive psychiatric treatment. Anissa Wire was sentenced to be committed for up to 25 years, the maximum allowable. Morgan Geyser was sentenced to be committed for up to 40 years. The Slender Man stabbing case is the most extreme and famous example of creepypasta bleeding into reality, but it is tragically far from the only one. The incident seemed to open a Pandora's box, revealing just how powerfully these new, immersive, and participatory forms of folklore can influence suggestible minds, particularly the minds of young, isolated, and vulnerable people. In the years following the Waukesha stabbing, other smaller incidents linked to the Slender Man mythos began to surface across the country like dark, tragic echoes. A 13-year-old girl in Hamilton County, Ohio, attacked her mother with a knife in their kitchen. Her mother found her in her room, wearing a white mask, waiting for her. The girl later told police that she was a proxy for the Slender Man and that the story was her whole world. A 14-year-old girl in Port Richey, Florida, set her own house on fire while her mother and her 9-year-old brother were inside. Thankfully, they escaped unharmed. When questioned, she admitted she had been reading Slender Man stories online and had also been fascinated by the story of the Ohio stabbing. These incidents, while less famous, pointed to a disturbing pattern of contagion. The fictional monster was continuing to claim real-world victims, not by his own hand, but through the hands of his young, troubled, and digitally connected followers. The phenomenon also expanded beyond just the single figure of the Slender Man. Other creepypastas began to be cited as inspirations for dangerous, real-world behavior. The story of Jeff the Killer, another incredibly popular creepypasta character known for his gruesome, carved, permanent smile and his catchphrase "go to sleep," was cited in several cases of youth violence and bullying. The Blue Whale Challenge, a shadowy, sinister, and deeply murky online phenomenon that first appeared in Russia around 2016, caused a wave of global moral panic. The story was that this was a game run by anonymous curators who would find vulnerable young people online and invite them to play. The game allegedly consisted of completing a series of 50 tasks over 50 days. The tasks would start small, watching a scary movie, listening to sad music, but would escalate to acts of self-harm, culminating in the final task on the 50th day: suicide. While thorough investigations by journalists and law enforcement later revealed that the Blue Whale Challenge was not a coordinated, real-world game run by a single sinister organization as the media often portrayed it, the panic itself, the story of the challenge, had a real, tangible, and harmful effect. The legend became a form of social contagion. The idea of the challenge spread like wildfire on social media, and some vulnerable teenagers, already suffering from depression and suicidal ideation, began to engage in the described behaviors, using the blue whale narrative as a dark, romanticized framework for their own self-harm. The fiction, once again, had created a terrifying feedback loop with reality, with tragic consequences around the world. So what is it about these digital ghost stories, these creepypastas, that makes them so uniquely potent, so capable of crossing that sacred line into the real world? The answer is complex, and it lies at a fraught intersection of adolescent psychology, modern technology, and the very nature of this new form of folklore. First, there is the critical issue of the primary audience. The main consumers and, importantly, the main creators of creepypasta are adolescents and young adults. This is a period of life characterized by intense, often overwhelming emotions, a still developing sense of identity, and a brain that is, neurologically speaking, still under construction. The prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain responsible for rational decision-making, impulse control, and assessing long-term consequences, is not fully developed until the mid-20s. Young people are, by their very nature, more susceptible to peer pressure, more drawn to the sense of belonging offered by subcultures, and can, in some cases, have a more difficult time rigidly distinguishing between intense fantasy and objective reality, especially when dealing with the added complications of undiagnosed mental health issues. Second, there is the nature of the medium itself. The internet is an immersive, all-encompassing, and profoundly interactive environment. Unlike a traditional book, which you can close, or a movie, which has a clear beginning and end, the world of creepypasta is always on. It is a 24/7, interactive, collaborative universe. Users are not just passive consumers of the stories. They are active participants. They can write their own stories, create their own Slender Man art, produce their own found footage videos, and add their own evidence to the ever-expanding mythos. This creates a powerful sense of ownership, community, and belonging, but it can also dangerously blur the lines. When you are actively co-creating the monster, when your own creativity is part of its DNA, it can start to feel much more real than a monster you simply read about in a book. Third, and perhaps most importantly, is the deliberate way in which these stories are constructed and presented. The most effective and popular creepypastas are built on a foundation of verisimilitude. They are designed, from their inception, to pretend to be true. They are often written as urgent first-person accounts, as found footage descriptions, as desperate warnings from a sole survivor. They mimic the style and format of real news reports, real scientific documents, real police files, real personal testimonies. The Slender Man mythos was built not just on stories, but on what was presented as evidence: the photoshopped historical pictures, the faked historical documents, the realistic-looking and often very well-made found footage videos like Marble Hornets. For a rational, media-literate adult, this is part of the fun, a clever and enjoyable literary device, a game of what if. But for a child, or for someone whose grip on reality is already tenuous due to a severe mental illness like schizophrenia, this constant multimedia, collaborative reinforcement of the story's truth can be incredibly powerfully convincing. The fiction is deliberately and expertly designed to look like fact. The Slender Man stabbing forced a difficult, painful, and necessary public conversation. Who, if anyone, is to blame for this tragedy? Is it Eric Knudsen, the man who created the character as part of a fun, creative contest on a Photoshop forum? Is it the wider creepypasta community for collectively building such a convincing and terrifying world around that character? Is it the parents of Morgan and Anissa for not monitoring their children's internet usage more closely? Or is this simply a tragic and ultimately unavoidable story about severe mental illness, a story that would have happened in some form with or without the internet, with the Slender Man simply being the specific culturally available catalyst, the particular shape that these two girls' shared delusions happened to take? The truth, as it so often is in these complex human tragedies, is that there is no single, simple answer. Blaming Eric Knudsen or the wider community feels like blaming Mary Shelley for a murder committed by someone who genuinely believed Frankenstein's monster was real. Art can be misinterpreted in extreme ways, and creators cannot be held responsible for the most extreme and unforeseeable reactions of every individual who consumes their work. The creepypasta community itself, in the aftermath of the stabbing, was horrified. They organized online fundraisers for the victim, Peyton Lutner. They released public statements condemning the violence in the strongest possible terms and collectively reminding the world that their stories were, and always had been, works of fiction intended for entertainment. The case of the Slender Man stabbing is a profound and uniquely modern cautionary tale. It is not a story about a literal monster in the woods. It is a story about the very real monsters that can grow in the fertile, unchecked, and often isolated soil of the human mind, especially when that mind is young, lonely, and unwell. It is a story about the immense, and sometimes truly dangerous power of narrative itself. A story, when it is believed with enough conviction, can become more real, more influential, and more powerful than objective reality. It can give you a sense of purpose, can give you a community, and in the most extreme and tragic of cases, it can give you what you believe is permission to do the unthinkable. The wall between fiction and reality has always been more of a permeable membrane than a solid, impermeable barrier. People have committed crimes inspired by books, by films, by music, for as long as those media have existed. But the unique architecture of the internet, its interactivity, its anonymity, its collaborative nature, and its 24/7 immersion has made that membrane thinner, more porous, and more fragile than ever before. The stories are more immersive, the communities are more engaging, and the line between the game and the world outside the game is becoming increasingly, and sometimes dangerously, blurred. This is the new reality we inhabit. We now live in a world where a fictional character, created as a lark on a Photoshop forum, can become the central, determining figure in a real-life attempted murder trial. It is a world where a ghost story, whispered and evolved in the digital dark, can convince a child to pick up a knife and attack her best friend. The monsters are no longer confined to the woods or the space under our beds. They live in our pockets. They live in our screens. They live in the shared, digital spaces where we build our communities and our identities. And the most important lesson these terrifying true stories can teach us is that we must be vigilant, we must be compassionate, and we must be critical thinkers. We must, now more than ever, teach ourselves and our children to be media literate, to be able to tell the difference between the stories we tell for fun and the world in which we must live our lives. Because the consequences of failing to do so are no longer the stuff of fiction. They are real, and they are terrifying. If this exploration into the dark side of internet folklore and its real-world consequences has been thought-provoking, I encourage you to subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the complex and often unsettling mysteries of our modern world. Click the notification bell so you don't miss our next investigation. And please, share your thoughts in the comments below. What is our collective responsibility as creators and consumers of online content? How can we better support young people who may be struggling to navigate this complex and often overwhelming digital landscape? This is a conversation that affects all of us. Let's have it together. Because the next digital boogeyman is already being created, its mythos is already being written, and we all have a role to play in ensuring its story remains just a story.